Jacob Blanc is an associate professor at the Department of History. He is over at McGill University, and he has studied, by the way, this sort of thing in Latin America, the relationship between the U.S., et cetera. Jacob, first of all, let me thank you for being here this afternoon. You heard the clips. I know what you've heard over the course of the past couple of days. Can you just explain to our listeners, if you can, going forward, it doesn't seem anyone really knows what's going to happen here. I mean, the question about boots on the ground was asked, and Donald Trump's answer was, well, we already had boots on the ground when we grabbed the president. What happens next? What do you think the ultimate objective here is for the U.S.? And to my point, is this just all about oil or not?
I think a little bit of all of the above. To your first question, Aaron, what's their goal? I think they're figuring it out on the fly. I think this is the first tangible example that we've seen from the second Trump administration of actually being able to put into place some of the expansionist policies he's been daydreaming about, right? He's talked about retaking the Panama Canal. He's talked about annexing Denmark. In the last few months, Venezuela kind of not came out of nowhere because they'd been targeting questions about drug trafficking for a while, but it really got to the fore, I think, probably because they were able to get some support within the Maduro administration to help them coordinate this invasion and kidnapping and airlifting back to New York over the weekend. So what they do now, we don't know, and that's why we're getting such contradictory statements from them. Are they going to do regime change? Maybe Trump says, but then they're walking that back and say they're actually just going to, help support and influence the Venezuelan government to put in place policies that are, beneficial to the U.S. But then they're talking about maybe going after Colombia, maybe going after Cuba next. So this feels a little bit like the dog who finally caught its tail, which is why these events are changing every day, and it's kind of hard to get on top of.
All right, so there's so many different sort of aspects. You brought up a couple of other countries, Colombia, Cuba among them, right? I mean, geopolitically, if you're one of those countries and you saw what just happened to Nicolás Maduro, I'm guessing you have reason to be concerned, number one. And then number two, with respect to influence in the area, and I think the U.S. or Marco Rubio, pointed to this as well, China, Iran, Russia, they all have influence in this area, and they've had influence for quite some time. Let's talk specifically about Venezuela. How much of a concern is that?
Well, I think it's a big concern if you're thinking about regional stability. I'll start with the example that you had mentioned of Colombia. So Colombia, currently led by a left-leaning president, Gustavo Petro, Colombia is actually a site of production for the global drug trade, right, with a lot of cocaine specifically making its way to the U.S. Venezuela is marginally involved. It's involved to the extent that it has, shares a Caribbean coast that makes transportation to the U.S. a little easier. But if you were to go after the main drug-producing areas in the world, let alone Latin America, you don't start with Venezuela. But that was the pretext and the justification used to take down Maduro, right, which we know largely as a geopolitical reason. And as your listeners heard at the top of the jump, it's about oil. Right, and so what Trump really wanted to do were to go after drugs, he would go to Colombia next. And so if you're someone like Gustavo Petro at the head of the Colombian government, yeah, this is making you a bit more nervous. And of course, someone like Gustavo Petro is not at all personally involved in drug trade. He is the president of a country where drugs are made and cartels run them up to North America. But if they can use this as, a rationale, a logic to get someone like Maduro out, those where ties between a country and drug trafficking are stronger, yeah, it's going to put you on notice.
So, I mean, if we look at this historically, first of all, I think, and I was interested in this as well, it seems part of the rationale being used by the administration in the U.S. was, hey, by the way, Nicolás Maduro, remember, he was indicted in the U.S. back in 2020, right? So there's an outstanding warrant, if you will, and we're just going ahead and fulfilling that warrant. I mean, does that stand up?
I mean, it's a pretty flimsy argument. You can go ahead and you can file criminal charges against any political enemy in a sovereign country and then invade that country and say you're not doing a military incursion, you're just doing a policing effort to, enforce the laws of your country. So I don't know if it'll hold up. My guess is that the Trump administration feels like it has a tight enough case on the criminal indictment from 2020 that was then kind of refiled with a few new charges just last year against Maduro. Otherwise, I don't think they'd go through the whole process of this entire situation to have a jury in the U.S. find Maduro not guilty. So they must feel like they have enough of a legal leg to stand on, but it's pretty flimsy in terms of international law, right? Everything that Trump has done flies in the face of nearly a century's worth of international law and precedent. And that's not to say that most countries don't normally toe the line of what is war versus military incursion, right? Regimes all over the world, administrations all over the world do this. But what's different here is Trump is doing it so brazenly, right? There's such a long history of U.S. intervention in Latin America. But normally it's done a little more subtly, right? Subtlety is not Donald Trump's forte. Right. And so here, he's not only being brazen to, airlift a foreign leader out of the country in the middle of the night, he's also then saying the quiet part out loud that it's about oil, right? It's not about the will of the Venezuelan people, right? Even the quote that you played from Marco Rubio, he says what matters for the American people, and I guess also for the Venezuelan people. Right, so that's a completely different discourse than what we got, say, 2 decades ago when the Bush administration invaded Iraq, right, where it's about spreading democracy, it's about toppling tyranny. So the winds of change have really put us in new waters here.
Would we tie this maybe, Jake, closer to when the U.S. took out Manuel Noriega?
Well, that's the closest precedent that we have, right? So that was 1989. Venezuela is a much bigger country. Right, than Panama. Right. And it's sitting on such vast reserves of oil that have been kind of crippled and underutilized the last 10 years. But Noriega was an easier political takedown, right? It was a bit of lower-hanging fruit, which in some ways makes Trump's capture of Maduro all the more impressive in the sense that there's real serious implications. And to get back to your earlier question, Russia and Iran and China have had quite close ties with Venezuela over the last decade. So I think we're only starting to be able to suss out how kind of the geopolitical dominoes are going to fall after this.
I don't have a lot of time left, but I do want to ask with respect to that, do you believe we see some kind of reaction from any of those countries? I don't know what that reaction might be. Some have suggested that China maybe decides, after the U.S. did this, maybe it's time for them to move into Taiwan and take that over. What do you see?
I think that is the situation that's most commonly being talked about. Whether Xi Jinping would actually use this as an immediate justification is hard to know. But if I'm China right now, in Russia right now, where there's still not a peace agreement with Ukraine, the Trump administration's flaunting of international law, it sure looks good.
Okay. By the way, someone just pointed this out, and this is interesting. Over the weekend, of course, I played the Marco Rubio clip. He also at one point said basically the U.S. can do whatever they want in the Western Hemisphere, period. And when asked about the UN, he said, basically the hell with the UN.
Well, it goes back to the days of James Monroe and the Monroe Doctrine, saying that the U.S. has the God-given right to be the policing force in the Western Hemisphere. And very much a la Donald Trump, he's tried to rebrand it. It is, in his words, it's not the Monroe Doctrine, it's the Donroe Doctrine.
Got a long way to go in this story before we see any kind of resolution. I wanted to ask about, we don't have time, but we'll come back to another time. I want to ask about regime change because, as I said, for right now, the person in charge is the former vice president in Maduro's government. That clearly is not regime change. But we'll talk about that next time.
Okay.
Jacob, I thank you so much. I appreciate it.
Thanks, Aaron.
Take care.
The biggest songs in the world. You've heard them countless times. Now, learn the details of how they came to be. Join Ruby Carr for Encore, the stories behind the songs you love. New interviews and newly unearthed archive footage make for a fascinating weekly deep dive. Stream Encore, the stories behind the songs you love on iHeartRadio or wherever you get your podcasts.